Marshall McLuhan famously said, "The medium is the message." What that means is that ideas are greatly influenced by the medium in which they are presented. A book grants images to the imagination while describing the way things might smell and feel, while a movie shows you sound and image but leaves the former aspects to your imagination. It's only in the last several decades that the technology has become adequate enough for video games to become a powerful tool for storytelling. But within that last decade, there have been countless games that feature moments powerful enough to make players teary. This War of Mine from 11-Bit Studios is a game from 2014 that does a good job of trying to be an emotional rollercoaster while showing aspects that are often forgotten of war. We can break down how the game does some of this using the player involvement model created by Calleja. It can be used to further analyze the medium of games and how players directly interact with them by explaining the basic layers of player experience and the importance of understanding player attention. Some of the dimensions of the player involvement model this video will use are narrative involvement, ludic involvement, shared involvement, and the combined effects of these dimensions. Narrative involvement deals with the engagement with story elements that have been written into the game, as well as those that emerge from the player's interactions with it. It considers two interrelated dimensions of narrative in games: the narrative which is scripted into the game, and the narrative that is generated from the ongoing interaction with the game world, its embedded objects and inhabitants along with the events that occur therein. The game's narrative is set in a war-torn country during an active conflict. You control a group of survivors with varying backgrounds. They each have their own set of strengths and must be managed carefully to avoid weaknesses. Players must also maximize the use of procedurally scarce resources, which can be used to branch off to different specializations. For example, if the player finds an abundant amount of sugar, which is used to make alcohol, they might focus on making lots of alcohol to barter for other essential materials and food. Meanwhile, if the player finds weapons early in the game, they are able to kill and steal valuables from other characters in the game, thus creating a unique narrative for each session through interaction within the game world. The ludic involvement dimension expresses players' engagement with the choices made in the game and the repercussions of those choices. These choices can be directed towards a goal stipulated by the game, or established by the player, or decided by a community of players. They can also be a spur-of-the-moment decisions without a relation to an overarching goal. Ludic involvement works closely in unison with narrative involvement. Every decision that the player makes throughout the game delivers consequences that the player has to consider. In this War of Mine, players have to choose which character sleeps well and which character doesn't, which character eats and which starves, whether or not you steal from other innocent hungry civilians for the survival of your own. These choices greatly impact how the player would want to play the game, which can be the main factor in the game's difficulty and the immersiveness, as well as the overall game experience. The impacts of the consequences become dull over repeated sessions of the same story, because the player will be able to expect and prepare for what happens next, therefore creating an artificial intended game experience. Shared involvement deals with the engagement derived from awareness of and interaction with other agents in a game environment. These agents can be human or computer controlled, and the interactions have been discussed in terms of cohabitation, cooperation, and competition. Thus, shared involvement encompasses all aspects relating to being with other entities in a common environment, ranging from making collaborative battle strategies to discussing guild politics, or simply being aware of the fact that actions are occurring in a social context. Again, shared involvement works closely with ludic involvement elements. Your main shared elements are that you control this group indirectly, but you cannot control how they feel or how they react to their own actions. You may make a character murder people, and then that character may become depressed. Further into the game, you will be forced to make difficult choices, such as giving up resources to help a mother who is scared she will be assaulted and murdered, or you may be forced into combat with somebody who do not want to fight you. A prime example is killing somebody who runs up to you screaming at you to get out, with the expectation that you are now in combat with the entire building, only to have him beg for mercy before death and then for everyone else in the building to fall to their knees in terror that he is gone and virtually ignore your presence as they pray to God and curse reality. The first time that these actions occur, it can very easily leave the players feeling guilty. But after 1 or 2 playthroughs, it is very easy to see that these events are scripted and not feel guilty about them, knowing that you will be better off occasionally doing the wrong thing. There is also shared involvement in a positive light in this game as interactions with NPCs. There are occasions where you can make choices that have an impact on NPCs in a positive way. You can feed the homeless or free people who are being trafficked. Both interactions will leave your survivors with a content status effect and could lead to rewards in the game world. Dimensions of the player involvement model by Calleja, in this case mainly, narrative involvement, shared involvement, ludic involvement, and their combined effects discussed through the examples of the game. This War of Mine are good examples of how this medium can be powerful, whether if it's making difficult moral choices or being immersed in a rarely seen side of war. The player's attention and overall game experience can create a message unique to games as a medium of interactivity. It can represent ideas and stories in ways unlike traditional media, like books and film are able to, by creating involvement that is validated by presence of actors on a screen. And with more advances in technology, it will be important for people to talk about games not just for entertainment, but as a medium and an art form.